In this video, I'm going to be building my ladder. Now I want to start off by saying that you're going to need to evaluate your specific circumstances to determine if a ladder like this is appropriate for you. This ladder works for me, the angle works for me, and it holds my weight, but it may not work for you. You may have a different angle requirement. Perhaps you can only fit a certain angle in your house, or perhaps you're comfortable at a certain angle, or perhaps you weigh more than me. So this ladder may not be the right fit for you. So I'm just going to show you how I built my ladder that's for me, but you're going to have to evaluate for you what ladder is appropriate for you. This ladder is a pretty straightforward design. We're using 2x6s for our side rails and then 1x4 pine for our steps or our rungs. Now the side rails have these little notches cut out of them that the rungs slide into, and that way the side rails can actually provide support and we're not relying just on screws. For the side rails I use 2x6, and it's only about a 2x4 here, but I use 2x6s because I wanted it to get a little bit fatter at the top so that I had a little bit of a ledge to hang on the loft. If you just set a ladder up against the loft, there's a good chance that as you're climbing down it, the bottom can kick out and fall out. So I've put these little ledges here which kind of catch and prevent that from happening. Now I've seen other people that install a pole and the ladder will have some hooks on it, or even just some eye hooks, and the ladder has the hooks on it that hook into that. That's probably even a little bit better. It won't move. It's a little bit more fastened on there, and so it's less likely to slide out on you. This works well for me, but like I said, there's probably a more secure way. But I like this. This is a good balance for me to feel somewhat secure, but also still be able to move the ladder easily out of the way. Many of the dimensions of your ladder are going to need to be chosen by you for what you're comfortable with and what works in your circumstances. For instance, on this particular ladder, I chose an opening between the side rails of 14 inches. That was a good compromise for me so that I felt comfortable on the ladder, and yet the ladder wasn't too heavy or took up too much room. Another dimension is the height. The height is going to be determined by your loft height and also the angle at which you want your ladder to sit. One dimension that you should not be changing is the height between the rungs. The top of the lower rung and the top of an upper rung should be exactly 12 inches apart. This is what we've all become accustomed to and what's kind of standard in the ladder industry. And so if you change that, when someone goes to use your ladder, they may get a little tripped up and may perhaps fall. So you want to make sure that these are 12 inches apart. So the first step in constructing this ladder is determining the angle that we want the ladder to be at when we put it in place. And that's really important because that's going to determine the angle at which we cut the bottoms of the side rails. The angle that I cut these top ledges at, where it's going to catch on the loft, and also the angle at which we cut the grooves for our rungs. To determine the angle that I wanted my ladder to be at when it was put in place, I did two things. First, I took a conventional ladder, just a folding ladder that I had, and I rested it up against a wall, and I experimented climbing up and down to find an angle that I was comfortable with. Obviously if it's farther out, it's a little bit more comfortable, but it might take up a little bit more room than what you have. So you have to find an angle that you're comfortable with. And then I also took a 2x4 into my house, and I just rested it on the ground and rested the top up against the loft and kind of saw how much room I had in the house to see if I had enough room for the angles that I was comfortable with when I was experimenting outside. So once I found an angle that I thought provided enough room in the house to where it wasn't blocking the door, someone coming in the door in the event of a fire, it wasn't taking up too much floor space, and yet I was comfortable going up and down it, I needed to convert that physical measurement, that physical angle, into a number angle so that I could cut it on the saw. Now to do that, you can use a couple different tools, and there's some besides what I have here, but this is a speed square. We've used this during the framing, and it has here a bunch of numbers that represent 0 to 90 degrees. And so you can rest this up against, rest this along the ground, and then use this to determine the angle at which the ladder is at. Another option is to use something like this that's adjustable, and I just could rest this on the ground, push this up against the piece of 2x4 that I have up, or the ladder that's on the ground, and copy the angle that I have, that the physical angle. And then I can take this over to my miter saw, lay it on my miter saw, and adjust the blade such that it lines up with this adjustable piece of metal. Once it lines up, down to the bottom of the miter saw, it'll have an angle for you. Once I had the angles, I took my two 2x6s and I cut the bottoms with that specific angle. I then took the 2x4s, leaned them up inside the house where the bottoms of the side rails were even with the ground. Wanted to make sure that they had contact in both the front and the back of the bottom of the rail. And then I leaned them up against the loft. From there, I could go ahead and mark exactly where I wanted this little bit of a groove to rest at, so that I knew that it was gonna hook onto the top of the loft. Now I cut this groove at the same angle. I cut the bottom of the rails so that they would be perfectly level with the ground. The loft is even with the ground, or parallel to the ground. And so I knew that these little cuts had to be at that same angle. And then after I cut that, I measured up the height, and I went ahead and cut the tops of the boards at the same angle. Once the two side rails were cut to the proper length, it was time to cut the grooves where the rungs would fit in. And I'll tell you, this is the biggest pain in the butt part of building a ladder. There are tools out there. There's a radial arm saw which can cut the exact width of a rung with a single swipe. But I don't have one of those tools, and it's kind of an expensive tool for this one-off project, just creating one ladder. So cutting these notches is a big pain. It's the bulk of the work of this ladder. So to do that, what I did was, I know that I wanted 12 inches between the rungs. So I measured from the very bottom up 12 inches, and I took this tool that I had the angle marked on it. I had it set to mimic the angle that the ladder was at, and I could use this to then draw a line on these side rails that had the same angle as the bottom. And so from the bottom up 12 inches, I drew a line. Up 12 inches from that line, I drew another line, and so on and so forth, until I got up to the height that I wanted to. And then I drew another line that was for the width, that came down to compensate or to mark the width of the rung. Now you don't want to go too big. You don't want to accidentally, you can always cut a little bit more. So I would err on the side of having a little bit too small. This is about 3/4 of an inch thick, and so you might want to do just a 1/16 of an inch less than that when you're marking that second line. Like I said, you can always come back. It's better to have a really tight fit of these rungs. So then to cut out the actual section for the rung, I just used a circular saw. And the circular saw I set to be the depth of how far I wanted the rung to come in. And in this case, it's 1/2 of an inch. So I set the depth of my circular saw to be 1/2 of an inch. And then I just ran it along that first line. And then I ran it along on the inside of the first line. And then I ran it along the inside of the second line. And then I just ran it back and forth to kind of chew away that center portion. As I said, there's a tool that you can set at an angle and just do it with a single swipe, which would be perfect. But I just simply don't have one of those. So I just had to do it manually. Now, by the time you get down, I've got 7 steps here. By the time you get done with 14 of that backward and forward motion, cutting out all these sections, your arm's going to be a little tired. So if you have to break it up by a little bit, you might want to do one side rail and then come back and do the other side rail later. The rungs are made out of 1x4 select grade pine. Now they've got just standard pine, which can be a little bit beat up, but the select grade is furniture grade. It's really nice quality wood. And I also find it to be more dense and stronger. So not only did I want it to look nice, but I also wanted it to be strong. Once your two side rails are done, it's time to work on the rungs. Now, as I said, this is 1x4 pine, and it comes from the store. It comes with a sharp edge on it, but I really didn't want a sharp edge on this because you're going to be climbing up and down it. You may not have shoes on one day, and it's just a little bit nicer to have a nice soft edge. Now, to put this soft edge on there, I used a router. And you're going to want to router all of this before you cut the wood. If you router it afterwards, then it's a little bit more of a pain because you're holding a smaller piece of wood. It's a little bit harder to deal with these corners once it's cut. If you just do a solid, the full 8-foot length of board, if you bought an 8-foot length, it's just a lot easier because you can do it really quickly. So I went ahead and routed. I just originally was only going to router the one edge, but I went ahead and routed all of them just because it looks so nice. And so I routed all the edges, and then I cut these to be 15 inches. I wanted 14 inches between my side rails, and I knew it was going to come in a half an inch on either side. So each of these rungs is 15 inches long. Once all the pieces were cut, I went ahead and assembled the ladder. Now to do that, I just laid everything out on the ground. I went ahead and put glue in my my cutouts here, and I also pre-drilled the side rails and also drilled pilot holes into the rungs. I didn't want any of this wood to split, not only because it wouldn't look nice because it's a finished piece of almost like a finished piece of furniture, but also because any splits would really compromise the integrity of the wood. If one of these rungs were split, and after a little while of use, it could very well break free, and I definitely don't want that. Now with a ladder, one thing that you have to be really aware of is that a lot of ladders, there's no cross support here. So a potential that could happen with a ladder is that if you get up on the top and it starts to rack a little bit, meaning that if you were to wiggle from side to side, there's really no support to prevent that. And so racking, when a ladder racks, it can just all of a sudden just collapse on you. So to prevent that, I'm using these longer screws. The longer screws provide a lot of strength. I've got glue in here, and so I feel pretty confident that this ladder isn't going to collapse. It's not going to rack that much. But if I were to get on there and wiggle it enough, eventually I would start to break these seams down or these joints down, and it could very well collapse. What you could do is you could put support across the back here that would prevent that, even just a solid sheet on one of these. I didn't want to do that because you want to have room for your foot. You could perhaps put a solid sheet where you will still make room for your foot. And you could always look to see what commercial ladder companies are doing to see what they can do to prevent that. A lot of companies on wooden ladders, they'll run a metal rod underneath the step, which you would think would provide support for the step itself or the rung. But what it's actually doing is they run that metal rod, but then they put a spacer in there, which creates a tremendous amount of tension. So it really brings these, really tightens up and pinches these side rails together, which is their way of eliminating or reducing the potential for racking. So it's just just be aware of that's a potential issue. If you get on your ladder and it moves a little bit, that's a serious problem, and you'll definitely want to address that before using it.